Hi everyone, I'm Emma Everett, Client Advice Manager and Chair of the Investment Committee at Momentum Wealth. I'm joined today by our Managing Director, Damien Collins. Thanks for joining me today, Damien.
My pleasure, Emma.
And as you can see, we're recording from remote studios today, as like many Perth residents, most of our team are currently working from home. There's been a lot of updates for Australia and the world the last several weeks as we deal with this unprecedented health crisis and the flow-on effects for the economy and other areas like property. And so this is the beginning of a video series from us to you, outlining what's happening and how it affects the property market. So throughout this series, I will be interviewing a number of members of our team, looking at specific areas, whether it's the rental market or finance or commercial property. We thought we'd start today with a quick update and a broader look at the WA property market. Now, Damien, we've seen quite a lot of changes. We've seen a lot of news updates. There's been a number of initiatives introduced both at a government level to support employment and to support small business, but also institutional incentives like from banks offering repayment holidays and assistance as well. So we'll cover some of this in more detail in coming weeks, but what impact do you expect to see in the short term on the property market from the COVID-19 health crisis?
Yeah, Emma, it's certainly been an incredible time, one that I can't remember in my life. And I guess it's always hard to see longer term when we're in a situation like this, but we do know that we're going to come out of it eventually, hopefully sooner rather than later. Look, initially what we saw in the market was actually a speed up in transactions. We saw people who were in the market decide, I really want to buy, I just want to get it done, or I really want to rent and I just want to get it done. But I expect we're going to get to a point in the market where sellers just sit on hold and don't bring stock to market, and buyers will probably sit on their hands for a while. It's just moving so rapidly. I think we're going to see quite a drop off in transactions unless someone really needs to rent or buy somewhere.
Absolutely. You can certainly understand tenants who are between accommodation wanting to secure that quite quickly in this market. And we've seen a number of tenants coming through and committing to property viewings to make that happen. Now, Damien, coming into this situation, we did have a lower stock level for listing for sale and for rent. And so I suppose that puts us in a good position. I've got a statistic here that there were 12,500 listings for sale in Perth's property market, as opposed to over 26,000 in Sydney and over 34,000 in Melbourne. So how does this stock on market affect our standing in this situation, perhaps compared to the Sydney and Melbourne real estate markets?
Well, I think there's a couple of things there, Emma. Firstly, as you mentioned there, we've got about 12,500 or thereabouts properties for sale. Now that's the lowest level in Perth since 2014. So that's nearly just on 6 years since we've had that level. And it certainly means that the market was already improving after quite a lengthy flat period and downturn. We were just starting to come off the bottom. So I guess when you look back at affordability, Western Australia and Perth in particular has probably the most affordable property in the country. Perhaps I think Darwin and Canberra might just edge it out, but of all the major cities, it's the most affordable capital city. And the reason being, of course, we've had that flat to declining house prices, and now incomes are higher than other places. So we come into it in better shape than other cities around the country. I think with the lower stock, the fact that we're very affordable means that we come into a better shape. The other thing too, the people who get most spooked in these sort of markets are investors. And in Sydney and Melbourne, they've been pretty strong. So they're the one, they might lose 30 to 40% of their buyers. We may only lose 10 to 15% of our buyers because investors haven't been a very strong part of our market.
Absolutely. I mean, even in December, we've seen some improvement in the investor market. It's still only at 17% of the Perth market, according to CoreLogic, compared to 32% in Sydney and 28% in Victoria. In previous months, it was quite low. So I guess that's good for the rental market as well. We don't have an oversupply of rental stock because we just haven't had as many investors entering that market, and there hasn't been a lot of new construction. So for people with a property that's coming vacant, they're not competing with as high a level of stock to rent that out.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. And look, the rental market probably won't recover as we thought it'd do fairly well early in the year. Obviously, I think it'll flatline now until the new year.
Absolutely. I guess another positive for WA is that we're not reliant on tourism, which has obviously had a huge hit after the bushfires and now this health crisis, and we're not based on service-based industries. So that we've seen some positive news from the mining sector, which is a big part of the WA economy. Certainly, we've heard from some of our friends up in Karratha that they're seeking rental accommodation for Rio staff and other mining staff to wear out the, I suppose, to weather the storm and to stay in town for a longer period of time to reduce their travel. And it's great to see that those big companies are keeping their projects going rather than putting them on hold. So that's great for Karratha, but also great for the WA economy to see that happening.
Yeah, the Premier's has said clearly that the mining sector is a critical part of our economy. We can't turn that off. So we have seen the local companies, they've removed all their FIFO from East Coast, so only FIFO is allowed within Western Australia. So as you mentioned, those Pilbara markets are doing particularly well. And I think, again, in the long run, I think that they'll probably want to refocus more people back into the Perth market. Just, never know when these things might happen again. Hasn't happened for 100 years, but who knows when it could happen again.
Absolutely. Now, we talked earlier about there being some initiatives in the market, and one of the big ones has been lending initiatives to assist homeowners and investors. So if you had someone who was buying or had been planning a purchase in the market right now, or considering selling right now, what would your advice be to them?
Well, look, if you are selling, I would certainly consider putting it on hold unless you absolutely had to sell. There is certainly going to be fewer buyers in the market, people who are potentially at risk of losing their jobs, which is not insignificant, but it's not all of us. A lot of people will still have a very safe and secure job. There'll be a lot of buyers out. There will be buyers out of the market because they lose their jobs, or there'll be other people who just spook to make a decision, given where it is. So if I was a seller, I'd recommend certainly sitting on your hands just to see what comes out of it. It may start to be a bit clearer in 6 weeks to 2 months to 3 months. We just don't know at this stage. If you're a buyer, I think this is going to be probably one of the best buying opportunities. We've already had a great buying opportunity in Perth. It's started to pick up now. I think it's coming back again. While there won't be as much new stock coming on to choose from, you'll have very little competition, and certainly the opportunity where possible to make some cheekier offers perhaps, and it might be able to get an opportunity where someone just wants to move on, doesn't want to deal with the uncertainty. So line up your finance. That's going to take potentially 3 weeks to 2 months. Get that in place, and then by that stage you'll have a better idea of where the market sits. If you tend to wait too long to get your finance, it'll put you kick you down the road, and everyone else might be in the same boat coming back at the same time. So that's my number one recommendation. Get ready. And don't necessarily have to make a decision tomorrow, but get your finances ready. And some incredible interest rates out there. It's never been a cheaper time to borrow.
Absolutely. We're certainly hearing from quite a few of our clients who are working from home or perhaps spending more time at home. And so it's actually been a great opportunity for them to dig out some of the paperwork that's required for a finance application. Next week, I'll catch up with Carla Merrick from our finance team to talk a bit more specifically about the impact that these incentives and these drops in interest rates have for an existing owner or for someone entering the market. And certainly for sellers, if they have an offer from someone who's got a qualified finance position, that's going to be much more attractive in this market. Now, of course, this week we've heard the restrictions on home opens and auctions. Obviously, government trying to reduce crowds as they should. But just again, to confirm with everyone, if you want to view a property, to rent it or to buy it, you can still make an appointment to view a property. A lot of real estate agents are making properties available to view online through online tours and other technology, so you can get a really good view of a lot of properties before you make the decision to visit and reduce your exposure that way. But certainly seller motivation is really important if you're wanting to get a deal in the market now. Now, talking briefly, Damien, about in the context of your role at REWA as our current REWA president, one of the questions that comes up a lot is what happens if my tenant loses their job? What if they can't pay their rent? Can I even get another tenant in this market? And I understand REWA have been lobbying hard for landlords and for the real estate industry with the government to make something happen in this space.
Yeah, that's right, Emma. We're certainly obviously very concerned on behalf of our landlords who the vast majority are your typical mum and dad investors who on middle incomes who are trying to get ahead. So they just don't have the financial capacity to wear 6 months of no rent. We're certainly asking the state governments and across the country to provide rent assistance to those tenants who lose their jobs. Now, it has to be very targeted. We don't want to a blanket rent freeze or anything crazy, because 85% of people will still have their jobs. It's more about for those 10 to 15% of people who are significantly impacted, giving them rent assistance so that they can continue to pay their rent, the landlords can continue to pay their mortgage, and we keep the flow of money going. So look, I expect there will be some level of no eviction. As we speak today, the policy is 24 hours to 48 hours away. I expect there will be some level of no eviction policy or legislation by the state governments. Now, I guess that will depend on how far that goes. Is it to people who can't pay their rent because of COVID-19, they lost their job? I think if there's rent assistance, we can all get around and work with that. If it's something further more blanket, you just can't evict anyone, we'll certainly be strongly opposed to that, because the 85% of people who still got their jobs and can afford to pay the rent, they need to continue doing so.
And of course, the great thing about the government initiatives that are in place is they're doing what they can to support employment, which of course underpins property rent and property values in the Perth area. Certainly, I'd be surprised if we saw many forced sales in this market, because, you know, to put a house on the market, you need to invite people through to view it. Banks usually go to auctions, and so I would be surprised if we saw a lot of forced sales in the short term.
I think,
but certainly there might be motivated sellers who are getting ready to sell those properties. For landlords, I would encourage you, if you've got concerns about your tenant, just keep in touch with your property manager. There are rules about how we do things to keep your landlord insurance in place, and I understand REWA have also been involved with that industry sector and communicating with them. And so even if you do provide some rent relief to a tenant, you really need to get advice on doing it the right way so that you don't breach any of your insurance requirements. Well, thanks so much for those insights today, Damien. Over the coming weeks, we will look at other sectors of the market. We'll look more closely at the rental market. We'll look at the commercial property market. Next week, as I mentioned, I'll be catching up with Callum Merrick from our finance team to really take a deeper look into the opportunities available to people both with existing properties, but also considering purchasing a property to take advantage of these historically low lending costs. A fantastic opportunity, to be sure. Thanks for joining me, Damien.
Pleasure, Emma.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. I hope you enjoyed today's segment, and we look forward to bringing you more updates through this unique period of history that we find ourselves in. If you have any questions about your own portfolio or about any information that we've shared today, please visit our website, momentumwealth.com.au, and get in touch with us. We'd love to support you as we all work through this together.